Friends, today we are on the 49th session of Legal Empowerment through Interaction Lecture Series. It's a momentous day for us. Like I mentioned yesterday, tomorrow we'll be completing half century. The 50th session will be tomorrow. It has been a wonderful journey, and that too without a break. I think the lockdown, we have benefited the most by interacting with eminent personalities from diverse fields, diverse subjects. It was indeed wonderful. It was a wonderful journey, and we had a lot of persons throughout the country, length and breadth of the country joining us in this journey. Today also, we have yet another wonderful speaker, that is Dr. Sophie K. Joseph. She is the Assistant Professor of Law in the National Law University, Delhi. And to add what I can say, quality and also depth to today's talk, we have our Professor B.T. Kaul to, he'll be expressing or rather entering the concluding remarks. So, simplicity being the hallmark of this platform, without any further or anything more, may I request the speaker of the day and the topic being domestic workers, COVID and its aftermath, legal incidents. Sophie ji, all yours.
Thank you so much, Shah. Thanks to Advocate Jaymon for coordinating with me to give an opportunity to speak here. I'm so happy to share this platform with Professor Dr. B.T. Kaul, whom we all look up to learn and pursue academic keenness from. Thank you so much for being here, sir. And lastly, thanks to the organizers, Mrs. Shyampadma Associates. My greetings to all present here. I really hope that you and your immediate ones are safe and good at health. Before getting into the topic, it is important to interpolate on what made lockdown due to COVID-19 in India different from other countries. It was nothing but unlocking of state lockdown by Indian poor migrant workforce on the road. There are many images of migrant workers that kept haunting us during lockdown. Certain images were really breathtaking, such as disinfectants being sprayed on the bodies of migrant workers, exodus of migrant workers with their families on the national highways, deaths of migrant workmen due to accidents in railway lines, national highways, and on railway platforms, images of infants crying near dead bodies of their mothers, etc. These were the images of many who came out to attempt a return migration. There are many who did not have recourse to leave the place of work and got entrapped in cities. This return migration reaffirms the theory of Jan Breman, one of the labor scholars on circulatory labor. He states in his book titled Footloose Labor that Indian migration is characterized by circulatory migration and not one-way departure to the city. It can be intra-rural migration, interstate or intercity migration to join for work in informal settings, and they go back to their place of origin as and when the work is over. The neoliberal reality today is that the guest space, the guest city or state, never absorbed them to formal settings or organized sector, and they have no settled place in the city. They remain us urban poor in waiting room, thinking that they will be absorbed to the formal sector. There were many studies that came out looking at the plight of informal sector workers in India. One of the important reports is the National Commission for Enterprises on Unorganized Sectors report, which is of 2007, and it is titled as Report on Conditions of Work and Promotion of Livelihoods on Unorganized Sector. It reports that 93% of Indian workforce is in informal sector and only 7% work in formal sector. This report in fact recommended for enactment of a social security legislation for workers in unorganized sector. And we see that the Unorganized Sector Social Security Act was enacted in 2008. I will get into the details of this enactment a little later. Now, coming to the specific sector that I intend to speak on, the domestic workers in India. This is one of the largest women workforce in India in informal sector. while I am aware that I'm speaking to lawyers in the platform, it is not completely a legal paper, as it is impossible to explain this sector without understanding its sociological, cultural, and political underpinning. Because we all believe that law is not a blind, insensate mission, and it needs to address realities on the ground, especially when we look forward to a social welfare legislation. The paper that I'm presenting today, it would foreground the issue of legislative lethargy towards paid domestic work sector for more than 6 decades. Professor Cronin, one of the famous legal academicians, he has used this terminology, legislative lethargy, in democracy debates to refer to ignorance towards repeated requests of the public for change by the elected officials in the legislature. In the case of domestic workers, the pattern of legal culture followed by the Indian legislature points out legislative lethargy. Why do I say so? It is evident from the legislative history of bills on domestic workers. All the 16 bills so far presented in the parliament from 1959 to 2017 were presented as private member bills in the legislature, and it's all drafted by the domestic workers collectives or unions. Therefore, all the legislative efforts were mainly movement-driven exercise rather than state-driven exercise over the last 67 years. One of the main arguments of the presentation is that vulnerability of migrant domestic women workers is caused by multiple marginalities, socio-cultural, economic, and political. And these multiple marginalities have contributed to their invisibility in legislative space. While discussing again legislative lethargy, the concept of legislative lethargy, to regulate this sector, the delay, procrastination, and ignorance towards this sector is constituted by the socio-cultural factors prevalent in the base. This sector lacks social capital, as the ability to network with power structures is very limited to be able to push for recognition. This hand-to-mouth workforce has no economic capital to purchase any asset or collect welfare funds for their community. And Parliament and government could ignore their long-standing legislative effort, as they have no symbolic capital or cultural capital, neither as a vote bank nor as a centrally organized workforce in India. As a corollary of this, the current pandemic has revealed that how they were pushed to margins without inclusive approach in policies and raised existential challenges. The argument is that they were even sidelined to margins on the ground of public health, undermining them as second-class citizens. I will start my presentation by explaining the extent of migration in the sector and reasons for migration very shortly. Then I will move on to my conversations with migrant domestic workers in Dwarka, Delhi, to understand the effect of COVID-19 on their lives. Actually, these conversations have helped me to identify how existing injustices against these workers have contributed to aggravated livelihood and existential issues of the workers during this difficult period. Lastly, I will deal with legislative lethargy and lack of political will to allow statutory rights and entitlements to the worker. Now, to explain migration status of domestic workers, migration of women in India has largely been studied in connection with male migration. Consequently, migration of women has been conceptualized as domestic and private and not related to the sphere of production. It has only been very recently that female migration, especially from rural to urban centers, is being recognized as separate and distinct category of migration. This is particularly important because of the prevalence of migrant women in domestic work as both live-in and live-out domestic workers. Live-in workers are full-time workers, stay inside the house, and live-out workers are those who are part-time workers who work in multiple houses. And when you look at data also corresponds to the fact that across all occupations, migrants accounted for the largest share of domestic workers. Interestingly, there is no official statistics relating to the amount of migrant domestic workers in India. There are qualitative study which elaborates on the data relating to migrant domestic workers. One such study, the ISST survey data of 2009 in Delhi, finds that nearly 80% of the samples of migrants that they surveyed on, nearly 41% came to Delhi specifically for paid domestic work. The largest number of migrants came from Uttar Pradesh, West Bengal, Rajasthan, Tamil Nadu, Jharkhand, Uttarakhand, Odisha, etc. It is also recorded that 86% of women domestic workers in Delhi were first generation migrants and only 14% were born in Delhi. Much of the growth in domestic work in recent years has been with live-out part-time domestic workers, although there is now a growing demand for live-in workers. If domestic workers, part-time domestic workers are beset by invisibilization of work resulting in a paucity of information, particularly in official statistics, the problem is even more acute with live-in domestic workers, with most of the available information is based on qualitative studies. Largely live-out or part-time domestic workers migrate with their families to the cities, whereas live-in workers usually via social networks, placement agencies, or their religious, regional, caste, and kinship identities. Now I just refer to my field to come up with certain findings relating to my study. My field was Sector 14 Dwarka, which is in Delhi, where I stay. And I have interacted with domestic workers who were facing livelihood issues because of lockdown during COVID. So the next data is about my conversations with domestic workers in Dwarka. So one of the domestic workers, Geeta, who lives in a Jhugi Jhopri cluster next to the middle class residential complexes in Dwarka, Delhi, states that she was working in 4 houses while the lockdown was declared. Immediately after the lockdown was declared, the employers responded to her in varied forms. One employer warned her not to come to work without any assurance that she would be paid for the days of absence. Another employer kept insisting that she should come to work with safety gloves and mask, despite the lockdown till the police warned her. Yet another employer asked her not to come again, resulting in loss of work and income. So all of her experiences during lockdown as a worker indicates aggravated forms of injustices and disregard towards migrant domestic workers like her in the public realm. A systemic denial to recognize domestic work as work and domestic workers as workers have left them always at the mercy of the employer. This institutional ignorance is also influenced by structural patterns and prejudices and have been discussed and debated widely in policy discourse. Life-threatening challenges that domestic workers face during this lockdown emerge out of multiple vulnerabilities that sustained in this sector. In order to understand the current inaction for the welfare of domestic workers, one needs to relook at these deep-rooted injustices exist for decades. A majority of domestic workers are the principal income earners of their families. As they stay in unauthorized colonies, slums in cities, usually without any ration cards and identity proof, They cannot avail of institutionalized benefits from the state. Their recourse to food is confined to generally free rations offered by the NGOs and philanthropists. For them, the social distancing is classist terminology, as their houses are very small spaces with no ventilation and independent toilets. According to Gita, most of them spend nights, sometimes as late as 2 a.m., sitting outside their houses to escape from the heat and suffocation in Delhi. Moreover, there are large queues for free rations on the streets whenever there was distribution. COVID-19 as a health crisis raises various questions, not only relating to individualized physical survival, but also about the structural patterns that relied on weakening of welfare state. Migrant domestic workers are facing aggravated challenges of lockdown apart from the deeply embedded existing continuum of challenges of the domestic work sector. Now I briefly explain about multiple challenges that make this work a pernicious work. One of the general assumptions regarding domestic work is that it is reproductive work. Now, what is reproductive work? Reproductive work is work generally refers to care and household work inside home, which nowadays, because of the dual earner family system, we find that in the urban spaces, domestic work is increasingly outsourced as paid domestic work. And the nature and conditions of domestic work are structured to keep the workers obedient to the employer, and any deviation from it is treated as aggression or disobedience. It has been theorized by many scholars as in many ways. I'm not getting into theoretical perspectives relating to that. However, it's very important to look at the concept of gendered familialism, which is one of the important reasons for undervaluation of domestic work. And undervaluation of domestic work is one of the reasons why there is always indignity towards domestic workers. Paid domestic work as work inside home or within a family is considered to be an extension of housework. This work within the private sphere has been noted as a reason for non-interventionism by the state. When I say gendered familialism, I use the terminology gendered familialism to also indicate towards increased feminization of domestic work. We see that even the data suggests that it's more women workers engaged in domestic work, and increasingly women getting engaged in domestic work compared to earlier decades. So this gendered production of the public and private sphere, when I say the gendered division between public and private sphere, there is a need to refer to Marxist literature, because Marxist literature refers to this artificial creation of production and reproduction spaces, and the work within reproduction space, that is work within family, was always considered to be work with labor with use value, which has no monetary value, whereas work that happened in production sphere, that is public space, it has exchange value, which has monetary value. So this gendered production of the public and private sphere has also led to undervaluation of domestic work, and many material feminists have challenged this Marxist perspective from 1970 onwards. Undervaluation of domestic work is posited on a lack of understanding of the difference between their work and other occupations. Society tends to forget the investment of effective labor, which cannot be quantified and remunerated using measures. Now, this sector also suffers because of the increasing migration, increasing amount of migrant workers engaged at this work. And as I mentioned before, domestic work is positioned at the bottom of occupational structure with low social status and recognition. It has always been treated as dirty work left to be done by women from marginalized sections. The employers generally believe that workers are obligated to be supervised. The representation of domestic workers as infantile, dependent, vulnerable, unskilled, and uncivilized is to suit to the employer's privilege of controlling them through acts of patronage and benevolence. When you look at pandemic, when you closely look at the period of lockdown during this pandemic, it has largely affected the daily lives of domestic workers. Domestic workers, they live in cities and they have to meet the cost of living of the cities. And they have regular financial commitments. And because of non-payment of salaries, wages by the employers, their burdens, financial burdens increased, and they could not pay money to their house owners. They could not pay their rent, and ultimately they had to rely on majority of the times on local money lenders, which made their life again precarious. Now, since the increase of financial commitments, now they are at a status that they would succumb to all precarity at work and all unfair demands by the employer. They have no savings. They completely depend on donations during this period, and there are theorizations around how domestic workers are always at the verge of poverty and starvation death by many scholars. And we also see that domestic workers, even according to studies, it reveals that domestic workers are the most malnourished among women workforce. It's also because they carry the double burden of social reproduction, both at their houses and employer's house. And they are the last to get nutritious food at home. So it increases their vulnerability to even chronic diseases. And during this period of pandemic, we have also seen that the domestic violence has increased proportionately, and it was all even in the case of domestic workers, the physical violence have increased at their houses, at their homes. Now, when it comes to explain the non-regulation of sector, I think which is the most important segment in my presentation for the audience. As I mentioned, this is the unregulated sector for last 60 years. In fact, the first trade union for domestic workers was established in 1953. And from 1953 onwards, there was consequent efforts to enact a specific legislation for the sector. As per Ministry of Labour and Employment records, there are more than 30 lakh women working as domestic workers today. It's the official statistics of 2011. And considering that it's the major women-oriented sector, there is long-standing demand to ratify the International Convention number 189 of 2011 from ILO, which is specifically to ensure labor rights to domestic workers. It is interesting to note that there are certain arguments against enacting legislations for domestic workers. The one argument against legislation is that many workers would become unemployed if it mandates a minimum wage. When you look at this argument itself shows the intention to protect the employer, the stronger party, rather than the worker. Another argument generally is about the speculation of failure in implementation if a special legislation gets enacted. We know that any rights-based framework that is aimed at social change is difficult to cause an immediate positive transformation. Especially in domestic workers' case, their rights are always positioned against financial obligations over the employers, which would include policymakers of all organs of the state, uh, legislature, executive, and judiciary. It also requires a change in the feudal mindset to simplify bureaucratic procedures, facilitate litigation access, and dissemination of awareness about workers' rights. Now, when you look at the existing paradigm of protection in the absence of special law, there is certain legislations which have explicitly talked about domestic workers under its ambit. And one such legislation is Unorganized Sector Social Security Act of 2008. As I mentioned before, it was enacted post National Commission for Enterprises on Unorganized Sectors report. But when you critically analyze the enactment, the general criticism against this act is nothing but compilation of existing BPS schemes. The act enables the central and state governments to formulate certain schemes for the welfare of the unorganized sector, including domestic workers. However, though it was enacted in 2008, only when a PAL was filed before the Supreme Court in 2018, the court took note of non-registration of domestic workers under this legislation, under the statutory board mentioned under the legislation, and the Supreme Court recommended all the states to start registration process of domestic workers under this enactment. And if you look at this existing BPS schemes, the only BPS scheme that has been extended specifically to domestic workers is Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana. And the data relating to the extent of implementation, is not available about RSBY. However, when you look at this enactment doesn't promise anything, any sort of statutory entitlements to unorganized sector workers, and definitely nothing to the domestic workers. And another enactment that we come across, which is relevant to domestic workers sectors, considering the amount of migration, is the Interstate Migrant Workmen Regulation of Employment and Conditions of Service Act 1979. When you look at the definition of interstate migrant workmen, it states that migrant workman means any person who is recruited by or through a contractor in one state under an agreement or other arrangement for employment in an establishment in another state. So basically, migrant workmen is only who are recruited by or through a contractor. We know that majority of domestic workers come via their social connections or their peers from villages, clans, etc. It's not necessary that they always come via contractors. And this act doesn't really put any obligation on the principal employee. The obligation is only on the contractor. So it's easy for, even if a placement agency brings the domestic workers from a state to guest state, host state to guest state, it's easier for the contractor to wash his hands off from the obligation, because of the, there is no proper licensing being provided for registration of placement agencies in the states. Another legislation that we can talk about is the Sexual Harassment at Workplace Act 2013, which sort of explicitly mentioned about covering domestic workers. However, we haven't seen any data so far domestic worker accessing the mechanism of local complaints committee filing any sexual harassment complaint against the employer. There are other piecemeal or sporadic recognition of domestic workers under law, and that is mainly under state minimum wages enactments. Although the National Minimum Wages Act hasn't included, and now we know that with new code on wages, the Minimum Wages Act has deleted. However, it's so important to know that what were the available mechanisms to protect domestic workers. So the states which included domestic workers under the minimum wage legislations were, there were 10 states which included domestic workers under their scheduled employment. Karnataka, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Rajasthan, Bihar, Odisha, Assam, Meghalaya, Jharkhand, then the Union Territory of Dadra and Nagar Haveli. They have domestic workers included. These states have domestic workers included under their scheduled employment. And then few states have also attempted to regulate domestic work through the setting up of welfare boards for domestic workers. And that is mainly in states like Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Maharashtra. Recently in 2017, there was a notification from Employees State Insurance Corporation on the extension of its facilities to domestic workers. However, it has a non-committal approach towards the issues of domestic workers. I say non-committal approach because there is a kind of discriminatory approach towards domestic workers. First of all, they have been included under the category of self-employed workers. So there is no recognition that they are working as workers under an employer. The state wants to clearly avoid that kinds of obligation on the employers. And another reason is that under various benefits assured in ESI scheme, domestic workers are only eligible for medical benefits, that too in a partial manner. Domestic workers who are registered under the scheme are only entitled to outpatient treatment for the first 3 calendar months. And even in case of emergency, they cannot go to a private hospital on reference. And when we look at COVID-19 relief policies, there is nothing specifically really on domestic workers or women workers per se. I would like to conclude by looking at one of the notification or memo that came out from National Committee for Domestic Workers, Seva Union. So Seva Union, after conducting a survey, it reports that the domestic workers were kept in distress without ensuring payment for the duration of lockdown. And we all know that the residents' welfare associations have come up with their own norms, rules, and regulations, distrusting domestic workers and also speculating domestic workers as carriers of the virus. And we see that there are many norms being imposed on them without any statutory authority. So there are a lot of ad hoc mechanisms, ad hoc regulations being imposed on domestic workers, even during the period of last phase of lockdown. And when you look at judiciary, we really, in the initial phase, we have seen the judiciary asking questions such as why the workers require, the migrant workers require wages when the state is providing the ration and other benefits. But definitely over in the last order, the court has asked the state to take effective steps for transportation of workers and their livelihood back at their place of origin. The only plea is the only demand is the legitimate concern of domestic workers cannot be overlooked to the benefit of mightier employers. That would really derail the philosophy of labor justice, that is empowerment of the weaker at work. I conclude here. Thank you for your patient hearing.
Thank you, so Dr. Sophie. And may I request before we go to the question answer or interaction section, Professor Call to give the concluding remarks.
Well, I think Sophie has very aptly drawn most aspects of the problems of the domestic workers. And we have seen that in spite of the fact that we have become a secular and then we have become a socialistic republic, about socio-economic political justice for all. One area which has not received adequate attention on the part of the governments of the time, from time to time, is the area of putting rights of the workers in proper framework. Now, over the period of time, what has happened is our organized workforce is getting shrinkage. Workers in the organized sectors are becoming less and less, and more workers are becoming falling into the unorganized sector. And with that, what is happening is that the rights of the workers are over the period of time getting diluted. And domestic workers have been, getting the attention that they deserve from the government or the legislature, because right in 1960, when Supreme Court was struggling to give a definition to the word industry under the Industrial Disputes Act, one of the cases that came before the Supreme Court was State of Bombay versus Hospital Mazdoor Sabha. And in that case, the Supreme Court was called upon to delineate the areas which are not industry and what are the areas which are industry. And Supreme Court was trying to give a very important connotation to the word undertaking in the definition of industry in Section 2J of the Industrial Disputes Act. And the Supreme Court said three things that are needed to get the protection of the Industrial Disputes Act was it should be industry. And then they were said, what is industry? They said it should be analogous to trade or business. That is the definition of undertaking if you see Supreme Court developing that concept. And they said there must be three things. One is there must be systematic activity. There must be cooperation between employer and employee. And this cooperation must be directed towards providing services and goods to the society at large. And they were asked to say what are not industry and what are not services to the society. And one of the illustrations that was taken by the Supreme Court in this case was the case of the domestic servants. The services which are personal in nature, they are not the services to the society at large. I engage a domestic servant, make him to do or make her to do most of my activities at home, yet she is not doing service to the society at large. But I was thinking, one of the ways that could be organized and that could be looked at as a model to provide protection to the workers, especially in working in domestic services. She referred to many of the legislations where she referred also to the Migrant Workers Regulations Employment Act 79. And she said that this covers only those who are engaged through the contractors for entrepreneurs outside the state. I was thinking one of the ways, and that is where I'm going to link this little bit of discussion which I am going to do on this subject is about ILO's Convention of 189, which talks about decent work for domestic workers. And for understanding that, it is very important for us, and how the linkage I would like to build up so as to give, and that is perhaps the only way we can bring up the linkage between domestic workers and realities of protecting their rights. If you see in this convention, there is a definition of domestic work. First, we must understand what is a domestic work. Now, domestic work is an inclusive definition given. They say the tasks such as cleaning the house, cooking, washing and ironing clothes, taking care of children or elderly or sick members of a family, gardening, guarding the house, driving for the family, even taking care of household pets. Now, this is what is domestic work. Then they say who is a domestic worker, and then who is an employer. Now, that is where I would like to link it. Now, under the convention, a domestic worker is any person engaged in domestic work within an employment relationship. Now, when it talks about employment relationship, it also talks about in whose employment these people are or through an agency. I think it's very important for us, if we want to protect them, bring in this concept of agency, that you can engage domestic workers only from the agencies which are registered with the government. And then that is where from you will be able to implement the legislation. And another area that will be important area is that in domestic work, especially mostly women. Not that men cannot be domestic workers, men can also be domestic workers, but the history of domestic workers you will see in India is basically, it is a concept which is an urban concept. It is a concept which is in the family where husband and wife both are working, and also those people who can afford to have a domestic worker. And if you find, if you have to regulate their employment, you see, when I went to England for my studies, I was told that Mrs. Thatcher has only part-time servant in her house. My director was of the LSE was Professor I.G. Patel, and he also had only a part-time servant, domestic help. Now, why? This is a question which you must ask yourselves. Is because the regulation of their employment is so strict. The benefits to which they are entitled under their laws are so, you have seen that diplomat in England, where there was some harassment of the employees whom she had taken from India. Whether it was an allegation or it was a fact, the fact of the matter is the rights of the domestic employees. So therefore, if this country has to make a march in this area, and ILO, if it has gained attention of the ILO, must be an enormous problem, not only in India, but in most of the member states of the ILO, 183 countries or 185 countries, which have resolved this into a convention. Seeing the enormity of this problem, we must see how best we'll be able to give effect to this convention. How we must ratify this convention, at what stage we must ratify this convention, and the recommendations. And COVID-19 has taught you that life is going to be difficult because we have not treated them well. Government, when they decided to have a lockdown policy, did not understand these vulnerabilities of these people, did not appreciate the vulnerabilities of the migrant labor and their families, and the difficulties that they have undergone and the pains and pangs that they have suffered, I think must open a new chapter in the development of the labor law jurisprudence in this country. Very sad that the courts, especially the apex court, did not seize the opportunity at the right time. Now that it is waking up to the situation, but the situation that needed, it should have been so moto at that time when the government declared the lockdown. And my submission will be that unless we create an understanding of the problem and also awareness of the problem, unless we create a edifice on which we can build up their rights so that there's a decent work for domestic workers, I think they will be suffering, and these vulnerable people, these invisible people, their sufferings will not gain the attention of the legislators. It is the job of the lawyers, this is the job of the sensitive, what we call as judges, that these issues must be taken up, and these vulnerable people should be protected and their rights should be protected at all times. And I'm sure this is going to be one of the areas which will gain attention over the period of time. COVID-19 must teach us how to respect their rights, how to respect their concerns, and how to address their concerns. And that is, I think, what Sophie has all through been saying. Dwarka may be a small place where she has studied it, but that is the story of all the people, all the domestic workers in Delhi. That is my concern about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. The presentation of Dr. Sophie and the new dimension that has been added to it by you, sir. I'm sure that all the participants and all those who will be seeing this presentation would have a relook not only at the domestic servant scenario, but also regarding the legal regime that revolves around it. Before we go further, sir, we have, definitely Ramkumar, sir.
I personally feel that they should be elevated to the level of a sort of protection from the conventional hire and fire rule.
Yeah.
Henry VIII rule or
yes, right. And most of them are exploited by Shylocks, local or Shylocks of the locality, and they suffer from poverty, starvation, malnutrition, etc. The problem of these day out workers, I think, is more, and not only for them but also for the employers, because they may be coming from some atmosphere which may not be what should I say, conducive to proper health, and it is from such an atmosphere they come to an ambience where it may be more hygienic. So every day when they visit the domestic employer, are they not posing a problem for the place of employment also? I think the live-in servants are more, rather they are more protected and more, and the lack of permanency in the service is I think more among these live-out domestic servants. Live-in domestic servants, at least you can expect some sort of permanency in their service. Whereas live-out, they may change their mind. They are amenable to all sorts of influence, etc. And I don't think that that may be the reason why there is no proper legislation for protection given to them. In the case of live-in servants, because familiarity breeds contempt, and simple is also the employees in. I have not studied this
Sir, is it a legislation that is warranted, or is it a change in
More
outlook?
more than legislation, there should be more than legislation. There should be some sort of protection. Uh, um, but as I said, in the case of leave out servants, you can't expect any continued service because of various factors working on her or him. So first of all, they don't come. They come from a totally different environment, and where there may be so many forces at work. Therefore, in the case of live-in servers, at least I think there could be a sort of permanency and some sort of restrictions, regulations, etc. could be thought of. Anyway, I have not studied this subject in some even skin deep. That's all. Nothing more.
Dr. Kalsa, can I just put one simple question to you, sir?
Yeah.
Sir, law is a means of social change. We have learned
Yes.
a lot about that. So, by proper
You
and
see,
calculated legislation, could we not bring about a social change in the outlook, the
no,
way
I think
they are treated both
you
ways?
see, always two things I think are very important is,
Implementation. That is
yes,
the most.
first point is you have Dowry Prohibition Act, but it's an educative value.
More honor in its breach.
But gradually social change is coming. Similarly, have to have a very well conceived legislation. Implementation may be difficulty in the beginning, but then you have to make somewhere the starting point. Starting point is, let there be a legislation in place where you put your minds together and see how best can this legislation fulfill the obligations that flow if we decide to ratify the convention number 189 of the ILO, which is dealing with the Domestic Work Convention 2011. Now, that defines the fundamental rights, that defines what is the framework required, that defines what is the grievance procedure, that defines what can be the forum they can approach, and how best we can in our system bring this in place and see how implementation can be done so that you do not invade the right of privacy of the people. You know, it's a very difficult legislation to implement,
Yes.
because you are directly walking into the privacy of the employer. It's not a place of work, it's a place where the employer lives. But then, you know, if you take the help of the technology, I think that's where the technology has now been coming to the rescue of the governments to see the implementation of the laws also, and auditing of the follow-ups in the implementation of the law. I think that can be done, but then you must first have a vision as to how the legislation should be framed. You have most of the legislations which are pre-independence legislation. ID Act was made in 1947. Trade Unions Act was made in 1926. Industrial Dispute Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act was made in 1946. Factories Act was made in 1948. You are living and making your industrial relations working on the archaic laws.
Archaic laws.
Can I respond
To
to
recast those laws because you do not have the courage to do that. Now you are making one code, two code, three code, C code, and I think at least one legislation for unorganized sector can be made as covering most of the unorganized labor. We did Unorganized Social Security Act of 2008, but what have we given to them is a toothless legislation. You make a legislation, you must have a will to implement this legislation. You must have a will to do good of the people. You are workers, Gandhi ji said, are partners in the production, and he wanted them to be partners in the profit making. Because he said it's a trustee. This concept of industry was a trustee concept. And he was the person who was able to get dearness allowance to the workers in Ahmedabad. He was the person responsible for getting profit sharing through bonus when the industries made, when textile industries made huge profits in World War I and World War II. So therefore you are forgetting everything about Gandhiji, but you talk only because you want to use his name, not his ideology. So therefore, if you have the will to do it, you can do it. If you want to respect the people who are contributing to the health and wealth, look at the plight of domestic workers. They are doing one job at home,
Yes.
another job at the workplace.
Yes.
And not at one workplace, they have to do this job at many workplaces because it is not just wage that they are getting. It is not the just conditions that they are getting. So if you are taking good care of them, you must make a law and let only those people who can afford them engage them. Those, Supreme Court said in 1955, those who cannot pay minimum wage have no right to exist.
Correct.
Right to carry on business does not mean right to exploit. So therefore, you have a right to carry on business, a fundamental right, but subject to the reasonable restriction. Minimum Wages Act is a reasonable restriction, and they upheld the constitutional validity of this legislation. So therefore, you have to be proactive, and this is the vast majority of the people. Unorganized sector is the industries are running today, whether it is from A, B, or C, or D. Government departments are running primarily because of the contract labor. All government organizations will be closed tomorrow if you decide only, if you abolish contract labor, because many of the places, the contract labor that you engage is not a genuine contract labor, it's a camouflage because you want to defeat the rights of the labor.
Exploitation.
Total exploitation.
Correct, sir. Dr. Sophie, you wanted to add something? Please.
No, it's not that we don't have rich labor jurisprudence. We have rich labor jurisprudence to use for the benefit of the workers, but it's about the will to use it. And when I was listening to the comments of Professor Kaul and Justice Ramkumar, I would like to respond to a few comments. One is about the registration or licensing of placement agencies. This is one long-standing fight of domestic workers organizations or trade unions with the states. In Delhi itself, there were multiple attempts to frame a legislation to regulate placement agencies. But 2011 was the last draft bill to regulate placement agencies. But then the government took a decision to register placement agencies under the Shops and Establishment Act, Delhi Shops and Establishment Act. And we see that in order to register, you can go online and register. And there is no check and balance system that the state do before registration. So it again becomes a mockery because anyone can go and register online.
Dr. Sophie, I have no problem. You register it under Shop and Establishment Act because it is not an exclusive legislation. Wherever there is a shop and establishment can also come under the Industrial Disputes Act.
Yeah.
You do it, but you implement the law. I just want to tell you another facet. Now you have Building Workers Construction Act, Regulation of Employment Act. There is a cess. Thousands of crores are lying with the government, and it has not been used for their benefit.
Welfare.
Registration is not being taken, and you are using this money now, their money, and you say we are giving it to them. You are not giving them anything. Government is not giving them anything. It is their own money which is being used for their benefit. It is already lying with the government. It is a fact of the matter. And there are so much money with the government which is from this act, which has been collected in the form of a cess. And Supreme Court Justice Lakur, in one of his judgment, which is a celebrated judgment, he said, how can you not use this money for their benefit? You use this money and I'll issue, continuing mandamus. You see, you need to...
Completely the siphon of the amount and the siphon of the money from Construction Workers Welfare Board.
Yes.
In fact, there was a recent discussion in Delhi So the policymakers were thinking on taking the money from welfare board and constructing an auditorium for the. So I was just thinking, we were,
Their welfare is the last priority.
yeah. In fact, they can construct one room flat for this construction workers in any place.
This is what should happen. They should make houses for them. They should give roti, kabra, and makan and social security nets for them.
Right, housing is immediate necessity of migrant construction workers, and there is money lying in the welfare board and under stress, and which is, the government is thinking about the.
Dr. Sophie, the question is whose welfare?
Yeah, exactly. That's why I said, though we have rich jurisprudence, who will use it? Who will show the will to use it? And though we have, for example, even on domestic workers, it's not that bills are not available. There are 16 bills drafted so far and presented at different periods of time in the parliament. All were private member bills. No bill was adopted by the government, or no bill was recognized by the government, or it was sent to parliamentary standing committee for discussion. Nothing like that. And the last bill, the 2017 bill, which was presented by Oscar Fernandez MP, it is comparatively a better bill.
It was a private member's bill.
Private member bill, but it is comparatively a better bill because it also talks about tripartite welfare board like construction welfare under the BSW Act, and it also talks about registration of employers, and it talks about the main 4 category of rights to the workers under the drawing from Convention number 189. So there are bills drafted with vision in the contemporary scenario, but who would ring the bell is the question. And it's interestingly, when you look at the history of domestic workers movement, it's a very consolidated movement at different regions, different states. Though they don't have a centrally organized union or centrally organized platform to come together, they have even tried to come together at multiple times. So it's very easy to deny or being reluctant to their demands because I think majorly because they're women workforce, major women workforce, and they are not an interesting or important vote bank for the state probably. So, and interestingly, the Supreme Court in 2018 did recognize that domestic workers are important part of unorganized sector workforce. So they need to be provided, or at least all the social security schemes, BPS schemes provided under the Social Security Act. But despite the Supreme Court's order, nothing has happened, at least in Delhi, nothing has happened. The welfare board, that welfare board is inactive. It has started registration of workers. And what is happening today is it's just civil society organizations and certain women's groups and also certain Dalit women's groups trying to organize the workers and try to distribute ration and try to help the migrant domestic workers to go back to their villages, etc. Nothing consolidated from the state level. And whenever they try to rely on state benefits, they would ask for identity proofs, which is not with any of the migrant workers, especially in Delhi-like space. So there has to be there has to be realization from the part of the state and legislature that this is a vulnerable workforce, and it's time that the state has to start looking at or start protecting us, these workforces, because increasingly, day by day, domestic workers are increasing, their numbers are increasing. So you cannot just leave them to the mercy of the employer or mercy of residents' welfare associations. They would come with half a dozen regulations, even breaching the privacy of domestic workers. We cannot leave it like that. The state has to, some point of time, address the issues of this workforce.
Dr. Kaul made a very pertinent point. It is after a strenuous domestic work at their place of living that they come to the employer's place.
Yeah, they
They
have.
don't get that sympathy from many of the employers.
They don't get that sympathy in the home also.
Exactly.
They don't get that sympathy in the home also, because
Yes.
mostly it's a very small place where they have to live. A family has to
Exactly.
live. And there's no very happy situation at their homes also.
Mostly slums.
The men are abusive. You see, the domestic violence has grown in size and number
Alarming.
during this
Alarming.
period, COVID-19.
Yes. Yes. Exactly.
The means to survive, and when there is frustration, there's going to be violence. And this is where even domestic workers do not have respite during COVID-19. And social distancing is impossible for them to follow, because
Correct.
hardly any place to live. They have hardly any place to live. So therefore, you see, this is the vast majority of the people of this country, and we have forgotten them. I think if we give them some doles, we think that we have, done a great favor to them. And we don't bother about their rights, which we have promised them in the form of fundamental rights, or what are the directive principles of state policy, or what are the goals in the preamble to the Constitution of India. I think COVID-19 should be an eye-opener for the government. Infrastructure by way of health, and also the well-being of the people, and their right to livelihood, and their right to earn decent wage is very important, and social nets for them have to be created.
Exactly.
Assure this, the respect and dignity, that would be the
Yes, most important thing.
Correct,
No,
sir.
when we say we have a right to live with dignity, we have a right to die with dignity also.
Correct.
And we have seen during this migrant workers, people dying on the roads, dying on the railway tracks. What dignity are we talking about?
Absolutely correct, sir. We have Nawaz Jan with a question, please. Nawaz.
Good evening, sir. My one question is to Professor Dr. Kaul, sir, and two questions are to Sophie ma'am. So my first question to Professor Dr. Kaul, sir, is this. Sir, when a domestic servant is employed, as you said, even if it is through the agency, now the master-servant relationship exists between this house owner and the servant, or it is with
No.
the agency and the employee? That is my first question.
That is what my first question answer. Let me answer this question.
Yes,
Yes. That is where I will bring regulations. I will be like a contractor. You know, when you have the Contract Labor Regulation Abolition Act, the contractor is the employer. That is why he engages only 19 or 20 people.
Yes.
Now, he is the employer, well as the factory owner for whom he takes this contract labor. He is not the employer. He is under contract for service. Well,
So
as
in this case,
man
the
is
agencies
contract
are
of service.
contractors.
Yes.
In
That
this
is
case,
why
the
I said
agencies are contractors.
Engage them.
Yes. Yes,
Engage them through these agencies. Make them liable to see that they follow the rules and ensure their. You see, when you charge money from me as a agency wala, and you take money from me and you do not provide the basic facilities to this man, and you say this money cannot be deducted from the salary of this employee, these people must be treated as their employers, and these people must be, therefore that very important concept in Indian labor law is contract of service and contract for service. For me, there is a contract for service. With him is a contract of service, and we can widen, you know, in many of the cases we can definitely bring in a very nice ensure implementation of the law very properly, because let them be treated as contractors.
Yes. So,
And
sir,
let these people be treated as principal employers.
Yes. Here the agencies are benefited from both sides.
Yes.
The modus operandi of the agencies is that they will recover a fixed sum of money from this poor domestic servant for giving them a job. And they will recover a fixed sum of money from the house owner whom he has given the services. So, in fact, when we talk about the unorganized sector,
it will become an organized sector.
Yeah, that becomes an the benefit of the organized sector goes to the agencies, not to
Yes.
the real stakeholder.
But then you see, those contract employees which are
Yes, yes.
engaged under the Contract Labor Regulation Act, they get ASI, they get Provident Fund, they get at
But-
least minimum wages.
Exactly.
That should be
Yes,
Sir.
with your permission,
Please, please.
can I just put another scenario to Dr. Kaul, please? That is,
Yeah.
if I, as a person who requires this domestic help, or for that matter, contract laborers, enter into an agreement, fully knowing that the scheme of that or the payment made under that may not be sufficient to give the statutorily mandated benefits to the employees being engaged, am I not also a privy to that exploitation?
You see, let me be very clear. I am only seeing a way out. I am not saying this is the model which you should adopt.
Correct.
We should adopt a model which is the best for the domestic worker. Now, what is the model? To start with, we can start with a model which is capable of being implemented. Later on, we can think of changing it into, like, I think if you look at the model of the Contract Labor Regulation Abolition Act, it has over the period of time been all right, because later on these employees have been asking, you see, once you make a distinction between employee employed in the domestic services and other services, because the benefit ratio may become less over the period of time, the loss benefits may be less. And in organized sector also, we have accepted the concept of a part-time. I will cite to you. If you want me, I will cite it to you. Part-time employees are also employees as long as they're employed under the contract of service. Similarly, these people don't work for one employer, they work for many employers. So we can have part-time, full-time, and then we can accordingly, maybe hourly, hourly wages, we may make it, all those piecemeal, piece rate,
Work rate and all that. Okay,
weekly, all those things we can bring in. But you have to start somewhere. Start somewhere where it is practical to implement this legislation. How can you implement to begin with? How can you change the models? That you can always do. I say one of the ways of doing is somewhere you must make a beginning. And if you make a beginning, there may be some problems here, there, will be able to solve those problems over the period of time. But if you don't make a beginning, there'll be exploitation.
correct, sir. Correct.
So two more things. Yes. Sir, one thing is that, what is the extent of the liability of the house owner who has physically engaged with this domestic servant? That is my first question. The extent of liability relying on this house owner.
What is
second thing?
In what terms?
Liability for what?
In case some untoward incidents take place during her employment in the house of that house owner, say for example a burn injury or something, any casualty that takes place, is it the agency to be held responsible, or is it the house owner to be held responsible? And can the servant sue the agency in case she has been provided through the agency?
You see, you can in the law itself make it very clear rather than leaving it to guesses. Because when you regulate, you must regulate all aspects of it. At present, when we talk about the Employees Compensation Act, Employees Compensation Act becomes applicable where there is a contract of service. So the problems, whether you are a employee of the employer, that will determine whether he is liable or he is not liable. But then you have the Fatal Accidents Act also. So therefore you have you may not be covered by the special legislation, you will always be covered by the general legislation.
Including Indian Penal
So the
Code.
master-servant relation will be invoked.
Yes.
Now my question is to Sophia ma'am. Ma'am, you were mentioning that if the Minimum Wages Act is implemented, it will create unemployment. Well, several persons will be deprived of the job. Will you please throw light on that, ma'am?
So I was mentioning about counter argument against formulating specific legislation for domestic workers. So one of the counter arguments against specific legislation is once regulation comes in, once an enactment regulates the sector, then there has to be definitely minimum wages. The workers would be entitled to minimum wages. In that case, the obligation on the employer would increase. And since the financial obligation on the employer would increase, the employer would fire the workers. So there would be unemployment. So that was one argument that came from employers' lobby. So when domestic workers unions, they tried to frame a legislation, frame a bill, and it was a National Domestic Workers' Rights Campaign. In the initial period, they tried to argue for extension of Minimum Wages Act to domestic workers sector. So it was during that time this argument came in. But see the fallacy of this argument in the sense,
Yes,
people are thinking about employers increasing liability, and because of that, the workers become unemployed. It's not because you cannot leave the employers to survive on starvation wages. That is, Supreme Court is very clear about. You have to give subsistence level wage, which would ensure efficiency and productivity of a worker to a workman employed. So capacity to pay is not, as Professor Cole mentioned, capacity to pay is an irrelevant criteria when it comes to minimum wages. And there, as I mentioned, there are 10 states which have included domestic workers under scheduled employment. Especially in Karnataka, when you look at the minimum wages schedule, according to regions, they have variations in the wages of the domestic workers. And interestingly, when you look at domestic workers' wages are the lowest in the hierarchy. So their work is considered to be unskilled work, and they have the lowest minimum wages in the hierarchy. So, you know, how it's also very alarming to surprising to see that, you know, without adequate inquiry, without adequate scientific data, you decide that state decide that domestic workers are unskilled. There are a lot of skill that is very important to do domestic work. In the sense, you should have emotionally, you should be very well tuned to the atmosphere of the house. And then
we can have skill development programs for domestic workers also. There is no problem, as long as we are able to treat them fairly and properly.
Minor aspects we'll come to later, but essentially let us survive.
Let us start with the premise. Basic premise is that fair. Let us treat them fairly, and let us respect their dignity. That's important.
Even if we regulate or give them minimum wages, that itself is a recognition that they are workers. I think the first and foremost demand would be to recognize them as workers under at least any of the legislation.
I think Jaiman wanted to add something. Yeah,
just a minute. Ma'am, you were discussing about the real incidents that take place in Delhi, the fate of the domestic servants, and you correlated malnutrition and domestic workers. Now, my question is, when a servant works in the house of a house owner, that house owner trusts her like anything. He takes food prepared by her, cooked by her. He puts on the clothes washed by her. He trusts the children to be sent to school through her. And naturally, the house owner used to give some food or certain other things, other facilities also to this domestic servant. And at times it happens that they carry the ration, they carry the cooked food also to their home. So I should say that in case of domestic servants who are engaged in well-off houses, and only well-off people will be able to afford the domestic servants. So they will be rather getting more nutritious food than a question of a malnutrition. Can you please tell her?
You give them good wages, they'll buy their own food. Good nutrition.
Don't do things like that. Just give them the money to get good food. Yes,
and what about their living condition? Prone to infections, prone to all sorts of infections. Many that we cannot address.
A 5-star cake one day or the other will not save them. It has to
Yeah,
be
yeah, yeah.
continuous, sustaining.
Yeah.
Jayman, over to you. Jayman, you wanted to add something?
In fact, when the lockdown was
No, in fact, I don't want to add anything. I was just telling us. I just want to thank Dr. Sophie. She's a very good friend of me. Actually, we were discussing about this subject. Then she told me even yesterday. I don't have much law to tell here because all our lawyers are attending. So I'm going to deal at subject where there is no law. So I don't know how far lawyers will be accepting all this. Then I said nothing. We lawyers, we need not look into all these IPC, CPC, no, not that alone. We have to think of these marginalized people community also. We have to think about all these things. So you just do your job, what you are doing, and that's why she did excellently. One of the shortest speech of our all 49, but she covered almost every aspect, and especially the presence of Dr. Kaul and other judges. But I personally thank her. She is having good work. I know her. These areas, labor issues, especially marginalized people, domestic workers and street workers, all these things. She is having, and she's pursuing her postdoctoral research now, and she is having several books on these subjects, and she will be contributing much to the this area no sooner. So anyway, I personally thank her for her time here, and it's actually this was a gray area for even us. We never thought of these things. No, I just frankly I'm telling. Thank you very much.
Jayman, I would just want to add that this forum is not of lawyers, not just of academicians. This is a forum of social engineers. We just want to have this forum contribute to the system, if at all possible. I'm sure that each and everyone has got the potential. So when we hear something new, when we are exposed to something new may come out. We are indeed thankful for that. So Prem, over to you.
Where do we draw a line between domestic worker and home nurse?
Sure. I mean, certain states have certain regulations regarding home nurses, wherein that is covered by certain, I think, executive orders. I'm not very sure whether there is any act for that.
But
ILO
nowadays they are
definition covers it.
nowadays they are
ILO definition covers them also.
Correct.
in fact nowadays they are employed for not only for on the medical aspect of work also, non-medical aspects also home nurses are employed.
Now, in this COVID era, we got the hospital coming to your house. You need not go to the hospital. Almost all the established hospitals are offering services by which the entire unit will be taken to your house for whether it's a single day treatment or even for a prolonged treatment.
Question of survival.
Question of survival, of course. Prem.
Well, Professor Sophie, you have perfectly addressed the subject. And of course, my question, it's not a question. Actually, I would just add something to what Professor Kaul had observed. See, part 4 of our constitution itself, we have the directive principles of state policy. Of course, I know that it's fundamental in the governance of the country and it's the duty of the state to apply these principles in making laws, even though it's not justiciable, I would say. See, articles 38, 39, 42, 43, and what Nawaz Jan asked was 47. See, these are all things which can take care of the issue, and we are having the legal instruments as well, which would give a degree of protection. The Unorganized Social Security Act of 2008,
yes,
to somewhat good level, was the minimum wages provisions also were there. But no comprehensive legislation is there to address the sector. And doesn't it really expose the fault line of the very democracy itself? That's my question. That's my doubt, actually.
In the sense that you look at Article 15, Subclause 3, it says that there has to be special legislation for
Women.
Yeah. And this is part of the sector where women workforce is majorly prevalent, right? This is one of the largest women workforce in India. So why not a special legislation for them? And, when I talk about a specific legislation for domestic workers, there is a reason, because the challenges and the occupational hazards of this population is very different from people in other occupations. Because domestic workers, they work inside home. They work in a private space. And there are different kinds of alienations, discriminations, abuses, labor rights violations that they go through. And there are caste-based discrimination, ethnicity-based discrimination. We came across last week, there was a child who was aged 16 years, was killed inside an employer's house in Telangana. The police also did not filed an FIR even after, despite the domestic workers official bearers, unions official bearers went and emphasized on registering an FIR. So these are very blatant violations happening visibly in the public space, city spaces. And there are, for example, directive principles of state policy. We can say that it's progressive realization. So when the state progresses or state has resources, it would enact legislation. But even under Article 23 and Article 15.3, you can well protect women workforce, domestic women workforce under a particular law. And there is always an argument that when you create a new legislation, you are increasing the number of legislation. Why should you increase a number of legislation? And it won't get implemented. There would be failure in implementation. What sense that argument makes, in the sense you make a legislation for a specific sector, considering specific challenges a sector faces. For example, we have sector legislations, BD workers legislation, construction workers legislation, street vendors legislation, plantation labor legislation. We have sector-specific legislation considering specific challenges within the sector. This sector, majorly women work inside home. They are vulnerable to all kinds of violences. Apart from labor violence, labor rights violation, they require a special legislation. How can the country, which is always supposed to be a welfare state, and also they always say that they are interested in women's welfare, women's empowerment. How can they neglect the 67-year-old demand of women domestic workers, to have a protection, at least social security protection?
I think this case, which is being handled by the Supreme Court now, when it talks about the migrant workers, I think migrant workers should also bring in domestic workers.
Yeah.
And if we had a Vishakha case where Supreme Court issued directions in absence of a legislation and could give directions so that women at workplace are not harassed, and that occupied the field, I think, up to 2013, after when the legislation came. I think this is the right time when some directions with respect to domestic workers can also form part of the case that is before the Supreme Court, and it deals with at least some basic areas that they can cover, because Supreme Court certain directive principles as part of the fundamental rights. So therefore, how they have got transposed, and that's why the approach of the Supreme Court from first making a watertight compartment and saying directive principles have to be read subservient to the fundamental rights. Then they said they have to be read in harmony with each other. Then they said that no, some of them we read into the fundamental rights also because of the widening scope of Article 21. So I think this is a good opportunity for the Supreme Court when they take up the issue of the migrant labor, and they take about the problems that came because of the COVID-19. I think this is also one of the areas some directions need to be taken till the legislature steps in and makes a wholesome law on this subject matter.
At least I think the employers should be advised to pay salaries, wages.
There's no question of advised, it's a direction. But be very clear. I am very clear on certain things. COVID-19 is an extraordinary situation. Labor law, like what the circulars of the governments are, that direction to the management to pay salaries for the period of COVID. Why should the management pay salaries? Why not the government? Because management in organized sector can at best be asked to pay layoff compensation
Yeah.
or retrenchment compensation or closure compensation. I have not read anywhere in labor law where you can direct the management can be directed by the employer to pay full salary to the workers. That is not the law. It is only those establishments which are covered by Chapter 5B, where you have to take prior permission. But covered 19 is a situation where, you know, it has come after 100 years. A situation like this has resurfaced after 100 years. So therefore, kindly don't be inhuman. You have to do justice to the management, you have to do justice to the labor also. Government cannot make it a plank of politics and say, we have told the management to pay full salaries. How can you make, he has not earned anything?
It's only advisory, right? So,
No, advisory, then they will not pay. You, government, court should do only what it can enforce. Otherwise, it falls in disrepute. The directions fall in disrepute.
that's what advisory has a politics.
And regarding the migrant workers, there was a 79 Act, right? Interstate Migrant Workmen Regulation.
Yeah, but then you have to, those are those workers who are engaged through intermediaries, through contractors. But and then they have to be registered under that act, you know. You see, you make the law, but you don't.
I mean, the individual workers are to be registered, or the contractors.
Yes, through contractors. Yeah, that is Salal hydroelectrical decision of Justice Bhagwati, where they were entitled also. They have to be paid a conveyance allowance under that legislation.
Correct.
You see, that legislation came only once before the Supreme Court. That was in that hydro project which was going in Salal in J&K, and the workers were not being paid their salaries, and they were not being paid minimum wages, and that is why the Supreme Court, because it had opened up locus standi principle, it came through a public interest litigation, and this is a very celebrated judgment of Justice Bhagwati.
So were there any public bills regarding this one?
Which one?
Regarding the domestic servants, because earlier there was a bill of 59. Was it a private?
No, I think this is a very good case for public interest litigation. That is why lawyers who are hearing us today must now make ready a petition and file in Kerala High Court for at least state of Kerala. Then they can go to the Supreme Court, and then Supreme Court will transfer all these petitions to it and then issue directions. You know, either file it in Supreme Court, send those days we used to send the postcards to the Chief Justice. I think that is started again. Now the lawyers, senior lawyers, have written letters to the Chief Justice. That's why so much of cognizance of this migrant workers has been taken recently by a court on its own motion. I think we have to do something like this also in case of domestic.
But sir, even if you go and file in the Supreme Court or in the High Court, as the case may be, see, one is the nature of their work. Secondly, what is the specificity of the employee-employer relationship?
No, you don't have to say. You have to see the miseries and the sufferings of the domestic workers and their exploitation and their right to demand social justice.
But sir,
that's very important.
Workplace means the workplace of the domestic workers. It is a private household which excludes their exposure from all the existing labor laws.
So where do we say create a new law? We are saying.
But can the Supreme Court say? But can the Supreme Court?
You see, this is where the mindset has to change. If you need a person in public performance of the duty, you need also in the private performance of the duty. So these people are serving large mass of the people, and therefore these people also need proper, dignity of labor and their rights to be protected. Why should a public interest litigation not? There was an association, I think Sophie will tell you about it, when some domestic workers were raped by the public functionaries, and that judgment came through a public interest litigation by the Domestic Workers Association. And then the compensation was paid by the state, who directed of the state, if they commit wrong, then the state has to compensate, and state had to compensate in that case. That was that's a celebrated judgment of on the violation of the fundamental rights and the dignity of the women.
Yes, exactly. Even though the directive principle is a duty of the state, but still, Supreme Court itself would say flip-flop. Now,
regarding the litigation from 2003 onwards, there are PILs pending before the Supreme Court on domestic workers.
Right.
So first it was regarding covering them under the minimum wages. Then it was regarding extension of ESI. Then after 2008 legislation came up, it was about registering them under the USSA Act 2008. Then now it is. Then it was about extension of RSBY to domestic workers. So from 2003 onwards, there are litigations pending before the Supreme Court. And the new application, I think the case that is currently going on was filed in 2013. So that is also pending.
And look at the Supreme Court sleeping over these matters. They are not important
yeah,
matters.
see, that
Are
is
they
why
not
I'm telling
important
you.
matters?
But orders are,
Sophie must write an article on this. Why are they sleeping over these matters?
That's why we have to understand one thing. Even though there have been numerous attempts to regulate this sector, even right from the period of our independence, it never failed merely because of governmental resistance or because of that. It is because of judicial neglect as well. Total judicial neglect, isn't it?
I must mention my experience because I was the one who drafted 2017 bill for the domestic workers.
Good. Send me a copy of that.
I was invited to present it before the parliamentarians because someone had to present it before the parliament. So we thought we would call some parliamentarians.
Very good.
And then immediately after my presentation, the first question was, I won't mention the name, but the first question was, if this is implemented, then we have to also increase the salary of the domestic workers. So basically, the parliamentarians also thinking on that way.
It pinches them.
Yeah, so that's a major difficulty in this struggle because you are all.
No, sir, it has to be taken care of because the Equal Remuneration Act of 1976.
Yeah, but then that is not in the domestic workers.
You become alive only when your shoe pinches.
Once we bring the domestic workers also to this category, automatically, even the minimum wage, everything.
You become alive to the problem only when your shoe pinches.
Yes.
Correct. But like Professor Kaul said, somebody has to make a beginning.
And
Somebody has to bell the cat.
Absolutely.
And state cannot afford to forget about the existence of this large sector of unorganized, exploited.
Absolutely, sir. So it was indeed wonderful that we all opened up on this issue, even though very much present but always ignored. We would like to just wish it away. We don't want to face it. We don't want to address it. But at least now we may think of addressing this very imminent, very pertinent, and very, I say, something that has to be faced properly. That brings us to the end of the 49th session of Legal Empowerment Through Interaction lecture series. We are deeply indebted to the faculty of the day, Dr. Sophie K. Joseph, who is the Assistant Professor of Law, National Law University, Delhi, for delivering that splendid lecture, and the new dimension or the added dimension added to it in the concluding remarks by Professor P.T. Kaul, which made us all think of, or at least conscious of, a issue which is you need not go out to find out. It is very much in your home itself.
Yes, you have to see it in your home.
Correct. So you need not go out and face an issue, but you just sit at home and at least correct. At least these participants, if they correct themselves to that extent, the issue is solved.
Don't search for it.
Don't search for it.
Let us not wait for the Messiah to come. Let us not wait for someone else to come.
You have a laboratory in the home itself.
Absolutely. Implement it. Let us do experiments, and on that, let us come with new ideas.
Thank you very much.
Ramkumar sir,
thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the valuable inputs and active participation.
Thank you, Professor.
Tomorrow, it is like I said in the beginning itself, we are having the 50th half century we are completing tomorrow, the 50th session, wherein we have a senior advocate of Supreme Court, Srimati V. Mohana. She will be addressing on a very short but very interesting and very important aspect, only Order 6 and Order 7 of CPC, and that too confined to two aspects. Number one is striking of and amending pleadings, and number 2 is rejection and return of plaint. So it will be confined to that, and the topic will be introduced by the director of Judicial Academy, Jharkhand, that is Sri Gautam Kumar Chowdhury. So till we meet again tomorrow at 3:30. Please take care and stay
Thank you very
safe.
much.
Thank you.
Take care. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.